as we go on. So let's get going. Our first guest is a local. He was a journalist in print, including some time at Comercio de Porto, before joining Renascença in 1987. He's now the Director General of Production at the organisation, leading, amongst others, the news teams at Renascença, including RFM. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Pedro Leal.
Hello, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and in Radio Days, and it's an honor to be with Matt, Patricia, Mark, and Anne-Marie. I will focus my intervention on the experience we have in the last 2 years during the pandemic, mainly what we learned that can help us in the future. With COVID, the last 2 years was completely crazy times. For one day to another, 80% of our channels start working from home, and that was a huge technical challenge. The scale of everything was enormous. Sorry. At the time, we saw some major problems that we had to solve. At the beginning, there is no immediate capacity to feed the demand about news. There was not enough good quality information. There was a lot of fake news that we need to do and to check. These were the main problems, but we had to deal with another one, the audience behavior. In 2020 in Portugal, we faced a drop in global radio listening. People were close at home, and we have to react. So what have we done? To fight confusion, we need to have a clear message. And we realized that to get more trust information and fight fake news, we decide that less is more. We decide to have more contact with the audience for less time. The first temptation was to increase the time of the newscast, but we resist. Instead, during the morning and the drive show, we increased the presence of journalists on air with short and direct interventions like explainers, short interviews outside the newscasts, and also we create a 1-minute space with summaries with the most important information at a particular time. The second thing was the form, the way we do it. We increased the interaction between the journalist and the presenter. We gave the news in an informal way. The third part of this strategy was on digital and on social networks. We built an independent but parallel program based on our strong personalities. First, we broadcast the morning show also on streaming video on our site and on our social networks from the house of the 3 presenters. Second, we produce original content video streaming, podcasts and videocasts made by the personalities of the morning show that help us to be with the listener throughout the day, mainly in the night, and try to fight TV. We have achieved enormous reach. Comment boxes were full, the dialogue with the presenters strongly increased. We have never been so present, close to the audience on the radio and on digital before. The audience was available and wants to interact, and we were there. In these last 2 years, fake news was the huge problem during the pandemic. We tried to fight fake news with 4 actions. Maintain the focus on the listener, not on the gossip. Have time, fight the rush, fight the so-called the absence of time. Make the effort, stop and think. Think what is the best thing to the audience. We always have fake news. The problem now is the amount and the complexity. So we need journalists with the proper skills to do this work that can investigate, research, and lead with the enormous amount of data. We also need to get to the basics and follow the rules, do good journalism. In our group, in our radio stations, in the last 2 years, we never had the need to correct a given news about COVID. The little big secret is integration. This was something that worked very well for us. Integration between journalists and presenters. Journalists and presenters working together on the way we put news on there, and that simulate an interacting with the audience. The presenter play the role of the audience by asking the questions that everyone had at the time, and that works also. By doing this, we win relevance, we join credible information with strong and top personalities. In result, we increase the trust on our content, and we manage a more listener-friendly content flow. With this short, simple, but I believe strong strategy, in the last 2 years, we grow our audience. and we are now in a better position than we were before the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Pedro. Our next speaker worked as a reporter, editor and host for the ARD show Panorama. She then headed the ARD Southeast Asia studio in Singapore and served as the US correspondent in Washington before becoming a director for the cultural and documentary programming at NDR Television. Since 2016, she's been working as a Director General at Rundfunk Berlin Brandenburg Broadcasting. Please welcome Patricia Schlesinger.
Thank you, Matt, for your kind introduction. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon. Netflix kills radio star? No way. Radio is a medium beyond time and trends. It is innovating, recreating itself, and continuously. It sets trends. We all know radio informs about highly current developments in the world, in society, in culture, sports, politics. As a public broadcaster, we are committed to journalistic principles and ethics through our mandate. But personally, I also have a rather sentimental attitude towards radio. To me, radio is, next to the news factor, a medium that never ages. A young medium also for those who stay young. Because for everyone, the story between him or her and the radio begins when we are young. Radio is about the discovery of one's own world, of one's own music, of one's own privacy. Listening through my headphones, it's just me and the radio. No parents, no teachers. Radio is invisible. It's just me. It's a secret. The pandemic has increased this longing for privacy among young people, with millions of families in lockdown. How many times has the end of the radio era been predicted? Well, the end of radio is as far as ever. Radio is very much alive. Recent media analysis show that traditional classical radio in Germany has a daily range about 75%. 75%. Also, podcasts are booming, but not at the expense of radio. In Germany, you can listen to around 70,000 German-speaking podcasts. 70,000. 1,300 of them are produced by ARD, the joint organization of Germany's regional public service broadcasters, of which my station, RBB, is part. ARD has set up its own audio library, which faces a growing popularity. In 2020, the number of hits was increased by 130% compared to the previous year to over 54 million. ARD alone operates 75 stations in Germany. Our listeners appreciate our journalistic quality and our decades of tradition and experience, and of course, the music. And they count on our reliability, as the high audience ratings during pandemic has shown. A recent survey concluded that people, supporter of public broadcasting or not, feel better and safer in a society with the offer of public broadcasting. Radio, TV, online, our quality is our credibility, keeping the promise of good journalism, well-researched and transparent. Our goal is to become one of the relevant platforms on the market and compete with Spotify or Apple in Germany. In this venture, our joint organization, ARD, sees a great potential in regional stories, music, protagonists. Think global, report regional. Well-produced regional journalism can be a strong weapon against the charge of fake news. Well-produced regional journalism can be a strong weapon as almost everything, against almost everything. We report on site, we go and check, we look for ourselves. To optimize our platforms and fight fake news, filter bubbles, we work on clearer user orientations, provide better customer journeys and user experiences. That's the goal. This is a big challenge. First, when it comes to money, and second, how? How will we strengthen our visibility within the oversupply of audio content? Still, we are very picky with our presence on third-party platforms and primarily consider them as a complement to our medial offer, our very own. All in all, I see a bright future for radio as a very important and integral part of our modern life in the 21st century. On our way from broadcast to cross-platform, major challenges lie ahead. Cross-medial production, necessary efficiency requirements, dealing with more ways of distribution, and more productions on the same budget, or even less budget. Still, I'm confident. I believe in the power of radio. I do. But we might have to modify our way of thinking to check our attitude, our traditions. I will close with a hypothesis. It's not mine. A German journalist named Wolfgang Riepe in notabene 1913, found this hypothesis, and the idea, the nucleus of this is a new medium never replaces completely an old one. This is the nucleus of the idea. How often the end of a medium was predicted? How often we heard, we read in former times, radio will kill newspaper. Photography didn't kill painting. It didn't come through. Film never killed theater. Television didn't kill radio. The old medium adopts, changes its function and position in our society, but it stays. Radio will stay, but it will be very different, and that's our tasks. So that's what we are going to do. I started with Netflix kills radio star. No way. Radio will survive. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Our next speaker spent 40 years in radio with stints at Radio Contact, creating Nostalgie and Shri FM in Belgium, and being the program director for RTBF Bruxelles Capitale. Since then, he's been the CEO of Nostalgie, and then that expanded to run NRJ Belgique. He's now in charge of all of that and more as the group CEO of the N Group. Please welcome Mark Vossen.
Hello. Hello, everybody. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, sorry for my English. For my birthday, my birth, I was not really good in languages. But my heart and my soul are multilingual. Then I'm the CEO. Yes, that's right. But at N Group, CEO doesn't mean Chief Executive Officer, but in fact, Chief Enthusiastic Officer. And our COO, Kim Baines, is not a Chief Operating Officer, but a Chief Optimistic Officer. That's our goal at N Group. Ladies and gentlemen, audio is crazy. Everyone is there. GAFAs, few players, radio, of course, television, press. Audio is everywhere. Cheesy 10 years ago. Now it's the new El Dorado, the new trends today. $1 billion. The podcast industry is worth $1 billion. Audio is the format that best adapts to everything. New users, smartphone, smart speakers, connected cars, zapping, consuming anywhere, anytime, or multitasking. You can do anything. And something while consuming the content. It is the most accessible format. Anyone can become a podcaster, even my mother-in-law. Cheaper than the video, faster to produce. It's also the format that best resists the confidence crisis in the media. For me, First of all, audio is the voice. Barbara, a French singer-songwriter from the 50s, 60s, and 70s in France, said, voices are the breath of soul. Voice is the breath of soul. I like that. The voice is magic. During these 18 unbelievable months, voice has shown its power. Imagine this time without a voice. The voices of our hosts and journalists played an essential role in being with our listeners, especially those suffering from loneliness. And then, behind the voice, you have the intention. At Nostalgie Energy, Cherie, the voices were ambassadors of solidarity, empathy, and love. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I said love. You know, at our place, when hosts and journalists open their microphone, they don't speak to 1 million people, 100,000, 1,000, or even 100 people. No. They speak to one person that they love. And when you speak to one person you love, you don't speak the same way, you don't use the same words, you don't use the same tone of voice. Voices are waves. Intention is the meaning you give to things, and this meaning is carried by voices and waves. As a radio, we are incredibly lucky to have a resource without limits, the airwaves. And we decided to make it a weapon of mass construction. N Group's mission is to make all our listeners sing and dance. And we do that rather well. We are happy about that, but that's not enough. We wake up every morning with a vision to be a force of positive change for the world. With our voices, our songs, our words, we send out positive waves. Even as music radios, we have a role to play in the evolution, the positive evolution of the world. We have to do so in a positive and committed way on all levels, social life, society, economic, environment. Nostalgie is committed to human beings, energy to the future of the planet, and Cherie to personal well-being. As a medium, we can convey this commitment and be an example, or try to do that. We are not perfect. We have a huge responsibility. We support 1.5 million people every week. Imagine how many listeners do we have together, all together here. The meaning we give to our job is in each of our actions. On the radio, on social networks, in our campaign, and in our office meetings. Everywhere, listeners and advertisers feel it. My last words is this. The great challenge of humanity is to allow everyone to live with dignity within the limits of the planet, to invent a way of living collectively, above the social floor, care, food, roof, job, a decent income for all, and below the ecological ceiling, carbon neutrality, good use of resource, preservation of biodiversity. No country in the world for the moment do that. This is our challenge. As human beings, as organizations, as companies, as nations, as media. Yes, as media. We support that vision. We act for that vision. And I have a dream that all radios in the world do the same, with love. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So our final speaker has had a wide and varied career, including time as a newspaper journalist and department head, the head of communications for a number of organisations, and the rector and principal of the Danish School of Journalism. After a period as editor-in-chief of Norske Media, she became the director of DR Denmark before her current job at Radio 4. Please welcome Anne-Marie Dome.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. And hello, everybody in the room. And hello, everybody at home. I really hope that you at home will join us next year, because it's wonderful being back in the world and seeing everybody and being together in the same room. So thank you very much for that. The audio industry has for the last 2 or 3 years developed a multitude of new players, independent producers, digital outlets, new podcast providers, and in that sense, Radio 4 that I represent, it represents the new industry, because we are a new public service broadcaster, a new talk radio station with a license to operate for 8 years with public funding, and that is a huge privilege. We have been on air for 2 years, which means that we were born with the pandemic. We had been on air for 4 months when the lockdown hit us and we had to go back home and try to broadcast from at home, which was quite impossible, but we managed to do so. I think that it's quite funny to look back when we were granted the license to operate for 8 years. When you look in the license, and it's almost brand new, it's from 2019, you can see that the development in digital consumption and podcast is not or hardly mentioned in the license, which means that it has gone really, really quick for the last couple of years. I'll come back to the development for public service broadcasters in our country, but in everything I do and everything I say, I think that the most alarming issue in everything is how do we fulfill the promise of journalism and all the obligations towards the public to support democracy and trust in society and diversity. That is the ground that we stand on as public service providers. Journalism, critical journalism, still is and will be what we stand on for the next decades. I think it would be proper to quote one of the persons who said it very clearly about radio, the late Freddie Mercury, when he said, "Radio, someone still loves you, and now you're supposed to." We still have a majority of listeners in good old-fashioned broadcasting. They turn on the radio at home in the morning when they get out in the car, and they switch it off when they're at work. They switch it on again in the afternoon when they're at home again, or when they are in the car. That audience is not necessarily the typical digital user or the typical podcast users, and I'll come back to that, because our goal as a new radio station is actually to involve more people across demographic barriers. Even though more and more listeners find us online, and to be quite frank with you, here we have a challenge as well, because the majority of the digital users, they do find us on third-party platforms, platforms that we do not control. We have not settled with them yet, and we have no formal agreements with them, or at least some of them yet. They simply suck up the feed, and they make a good living of it, and they have the data on our users and their behavior. and they make quite a good business out of it. So the market is increasingly competitive, and we have to succeed on the same budget as was mentioned previously as well. So one of the biggest challenges that we face is being detected and actually found by the users in a jungle of content and platforms, and therefore we have to make sure that the users connect us with our content because it's good quality. They'll have to find us through a jungle of content and different platforms. Our task in that sense is to keep up with technology. We have to have really good platforms. They cannot be poorer than Netflix or HBO, even though we don't have the same budget, because the users are actually used to being able to access really good platforms. One of the other things that we have to do is to make sure that we every day have unique content, both in journalism, in the best stories. We have to have our own agendas. We have to have unique content every day, and we have to offer the best companionship. I'll say a little bit more about content that involves people, because when we won the right to operate the public service license 2 years ago, we made a vow to the public. We said that we would make content that would engage more people across demographic barriers. So it's not only gender, it's not only age, it's across social, cultural, economic, educational barriers. Talk radio in Denmark, and I think in Scandinavia and most countries as well, is first and foremost for people with a higher education and a fairly large consumption of media productions, as well as newspapers and culture. We cannot reach the audience that we want to reach with pop music and sweet talk. We would like them to engage in the public debate, and that is a task for us. We think that the mistrust or the distrust in authorities, politicians, in media, and in common good indeed, needs to be taken seriously. And one way to do that is give voice to people and offer them a true chance to take place in the public debate. Our dogmatic approach to that task is to challenge every producer at the radio or external producers to make sure that people can engage in every program. And that is not that difficult when you go on live, but it's really difficult in the podcast area. So that is one goal that we have to achieve, but we also have to work with that in order to give people a voice. Finally, I'll say a little bit about the general or the omnibus media that needs to have ice-breaking content. Because I think that one final dilemma that we all have to challenge is that as public service broadcasters, we need or we have the obligation to be there when something great happening, when something groundbreaking takes place, not only in the American election, in Brexit, during the pandemic, and you name it, but also in the topic of today locally. And in the same company, our little company, in the same culture, in the same editorial environment, we need to be able to make the very best when it comes to making podcast and content that is truly unique and very niche, which is actually the success of podcast. We think that being niche, being very narrow, and being very unique is the key to the audio success that we see these years. If you joined the masterclasses yesterday, you would have heard about programs about whiskey and cats, which is extremely niche, and you have to do that, or you have to keep that in the same environment as the editorial news making. But I think that's also the wonder of the development we see now. We actually have new players in the market who are very, very small, on a very low budget, but they can actually compete with us. They can compete with the big broadcasters, and we have to welcome that, because that is the main and ground success of audio these years. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anne-Marie.